Hello, everyone, and welcome to our latest DZone webinar. My name is Jason Cockrum, and I am the Community Engagement Manager here at DZone, and we're excited to have you with us today. We've got a relevant and exciting topic for you, and so we're glad to have you join us. If you're new to DZone, we are one of the world's largest online communities of software developers and experts, and we publish all sorts of knowledge resources for developers and anyone passionate about software development. With everything from ref cards to trend reports and thousands of articles written and published by our community, we are the go-to knowledge hub for software developers all over the world. Today, we're joined by Dan Gert, Hoop Booten, I think I'm totally butchered that, but we'll give it a shot, and Max Williams. Dan is the president of Flexagon, and they develop powerful DevOps tools to enable developers to increase efficiency and remove bottlenecks from the software delivery lifecycle and help achieve their goals. Dan and his colleagues are going to talk for a few minutes today about how they do that, and then they're going to answer as many questions as they can towards the end. DZone is all about community, so we encourage you to get involved and get engaged in the conversation. Feel free to submit questions, and they're going to answer them as best as they can. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Dan. Dan, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason, and thanks, DZone. Really appreciate working with you guys. Well, let's get into this. We've got an awesome time here ahead of us. Been there, rock that. We're going to talk all about applying DevOps to optimize Oracle Cloud implementations. And so I'm joined here by two awesome customers, Max Williams from HNI and Hub Boynton from Avery Dennison. So thanks Max, thanks Hub for joining me today. We've got a neat little agenda here. I'm going to kick things off. We're going to talk a little bit about the DevOps challenges and some things that we've seen in the industry and some survey results and such, and then talk a little bit about the paths to the cloud. So a lot of different ways to get to the cloud, and we're going to describe 4 of them, of which HNI and Avery Dennison will discuss 2 of those paths. And then very importantly, we'll get into the thick of it with Hub and Max talking about their journeys, right? What have their journeys been and the outcomes that they've been able to achieve. And then as you know, after we get done with those overviews, we'll get into some panel. I'll get to fire some questions off, and we'll see what kind of responses we have. Interestingly enough, earlier this year in 22, you know, we were looking at the state of DevOps, working with a company called Pulse, and surveying just north of 100 tech leaders around the globe, and really trying to get our head around what's getting in the way, what's stopping you from delivering. And here are the results in a nutshell. And very interestingly, importantly, 2 things floated to the top. First being legacy, right? Legacy architecture, legacy technology, things that are running many enterprises around the globe today. And so how do we leverage that investment and be able to capitalize on that? And the reality of the challenges and the complexity of 35% of those people in the survey said that is their top thing. Secondly is the complexity, right? The complexity of the environment, the increasing complexity. I mean, in many cases, because you might be leveraging the legacy, you might be adopting other technologies and processes and such, and that combined ends up being even more challenging. So let's talk a little bit more about what's driving the complexity. Okay, so what's driving the complexity? It's a few things. You know, in no particular order, but I will go from left to right. First and foremost, most IT groups did a fabulous job over the last few years dealing with the challenges of the pandemic and really delivering on what the businesses need to run and compete and deal with the challenges of the pandemic itself. And because of that, the demand, if you will, and the expectation of IT just continued to go up, so increased expectations. In addition to that, it's really an expansive and never or ever expanding overall technology footprint, right? So it's adoption of new technology, new architectures. It might be cloud, other architectures, databases, middleware, all these different things that go into an evolution of an enterprise's technology ecosystem, so that expansion. In addition to that, and very much rooted in part in the legacy comment in the survey that we talked about a minute ago, is and are those deeply rooted systems. And so we've got this extensive set of process and technology that's running many enterprises today, and you combine that with the internal knowledge of all of that, right? So those deep-rooted systems and the people that support them, and that while you are expanding into other areas drives increase in complexity. Tool chains. We love tools, right? It might be for planning, it might be for testing, it might be for monitoring and managing. Lots of tools that have been adopted and continue to be adopted that are good in and of themselves. But the struggle is that when they're point solutions that are not nicely integrated, it becomes a challenge and it gets in the way of being able to deliver. So adding to the complexity. Last but not least, why do technology teams, whether it's application development, operations, all of the above, why do they even exist? Well, of course, it's to support the business, right? And so as time has gone on, the demand and the complexity associated with being able to point to and demonstrate why the investments that we're making are impacting the business results. So very importantly, we need to still show that we're optimizing things and improving as development teams and operations teams and such, more things that are more DevOps metric, standard metrics, if you will, but it's the ability to raise that up a level and get into the business value. So with that said, Flexagon and with our Flex Deploy product and platform is all about making it simple, right? To drive that continuous innovation. Ensure that there's ongoing quality associated with those deliveries, and then ultimately achieving more. Really, the customers need to drive that value, lower cost, less cost and risk, right? And be able to achieve that. So that's what we're all about, and hopefully you'll see some of that come through today. And anchoring that is the Flex Deploy DevOps platform. So let's talk a little bit about what that is. For those of you who are not familiar, get a baseline understanding. So Flex Deploy is a DevOps platform. Well, what does that mean? There's a few things that we'd call out. First and foremost, it ties back to the tool chain, right? The complexity of disparate tools, non-integrated tools. So Flex Deploy makes it easy to be able to integrate the end-to-end tool chain, whether that's planning tools, source control management, test and security, automation and such, all the way through the life cycle to monitoring and managing. All right, so that's one. Secondly is platform features related to build, automation, and continuous integration. So how do we take code, configurations, all sorts of artifacts that ultimately need to be packaged up, versioned, and stored in an artifact repository. And so all of that capability is native to Flex Deploy. And then those artifacts are then deployed into a runtime, into an environment, into a test environment, QA production. So there's deployment automation. And then last but not least is the release orchestration. So how do we establish release pipelines, things that can be consistent, effective, high quality, so we can drive change, whether that's associated with some legacy technology, it might be cloud technology, it might be containers, whatever it is. How do we drive a nicely streamlined and efficient process that's secure, right? That allows you to apply whatever level of governance and controls around it and gives you the visibility that you need from end to end, whether that's to diagnose and debug issues, it might be to support audits, those sorts of things. All right. And then lastly, and very importantly, is the out-of-the-box support for enterprise ecosystems. So the three we show here are Oracle, Salesforce, and SAP. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Max and Ub will describe what and how that maps onto what they've been doing. But very importantly, it's the out-of-the-box capability that we engineer that comes with Flex Deploy that addresses all of the complexity, whether it's at an infrastructure level, database level, middleware, applications, so on and so forth. We remove that by providing the out-of-the-box support for those things. All right. As we've discussed a little bit already, every enterprise, every customer has a unique delivery pipeline. So we invest heavily in out-of-the-box support to be able to integrate with the many tools in the tool chain. This just shows some examples of some popular tools that exist, anywhere from managing secrets and credentials, managing the agile delivery and development life cycle, change and service management, source control, test and quality, monitoring, so on and so forth. Right. So very importantly, out of the box, integrate with these popular tools, and then make it very easy. If we don't have an out of the box integration, make it easy to be able to extend and tie into the tools that you might have, because again, all enterprises have that unique delivery pipeline. So make sure that we have a lot out of the box as well as very extensible. And over on the right-hand side are some of the examples of those ecosystems, not only at the application level with Oracle, Salesforce, and SAP, but lots of out-of-the-box support for middleware, database, BI, cloud, because as we all know, although we're focused on Oracle here today for the most part, there are many other vendors, and hybrid multi-cloud solutions are what what enterprises are looking for. So one key element of this that we can't stress enough is that it's not only important that we're going to go fast, right, that we improve the speed so we can compete more effectively, but we need to be able to establish these really secure and high quality software supply chains. So making sure that whether it's addressing and avoiding security vulnerabilities, and integrating that into the CI/CD pipeline, or injecting other types of quality checks so that we can identify and address and resolve quality issues as part of our development and delivery. So when we hit a production or live environment, we know we're golden. All right. Before we get to turn this over to Hub and Max, there are 4 broad set of paths to the cloud. And as I mentioned a little earlier, Avery Dennison has one, HNI has another, but in its simplest form, they are: 1, let's leverage the existing technology. Maybe it's running on-prem, maybe it's hosted elsewhere, but let's make plans to move to the cloud in a more methodical, a little longer term time frame. Leverage what we have, adopt cloud over time, and maybe generally speaking, do that over a 2 to 5 year period. All right. Similarly, but at a faster cadence, is an approach where you'd say, okay, we're going to adopt those cloud services, the Fusion applications, and other supporting cloud services, but we're going to do that more rapidly. We're going to continue to invest in and leverage our existing, for example, e-business suite, but then we're going to more rapidly adopt some of the cloud, maybe simultaneously by lifting and shifting to the cloud, by adopting new cloud resources at an application level, maybe at the platform and infrastructure level, but do that more rapidly. We also have customers that take an approach that is very immediate. So we're going to take and we're going to, you might call it the big bang, but we're going to eliminate some of our existing technology like an Oracle e-business suite or some middleware database. And we're going to do a very rapid replacement of that with the cloud. And then lastly, we call it staggered. It's more of a greenfield. We have customers that come in. They might not be Oracle customers at all today. And they might come in and say, hey, we want to adopt this Fusion application. We want to adopt some platform or infrastructure capabilities. So it's really kind of a net new greenfield approach. All right, well, let's get into this. I'm sure you're all waiting for the real good stuff. I'm going to turn it over to Ub. And Ub, if you don't mind introducing yourself and taking us through a bit of your journey.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Well, that's me. So I've been with Avery Dennison for about 10 years now, initially helping them get onto this eBiz platform that we're now trying to move into the cloud, right? And basically is what I've been doing for the last 25 years is basically large-scale ERP implementations, different organizations, global rollouts, and yeah, I think I'm pretty damn good at it.
Yeah.
So let's switch to the next slide, Dan. All right, and talk a little bit about how we even started talking to Dan and Flexagon about what we're trying to do here, because in the end, right, the presentation that Dan just did is, yeah, it hits a lot of the bullet points, but at the same point in time, right, when you bring in the consultants, right, their answer is always just move to the cloud and everything will be fine. The problem is that if you run a large-scale organization like Avery Dennison, global organization, right, with an IT infrastructure ecosystem that's basically organically been growing over the last 30 years, it's not as easy as that, right? So you basically can have the intention to get onto the cloud and to unify your technology stack, but getting there is freaking complicated. At the same point in time, right, as you're doing that, the reality is that it's often, yeah, forgotten that while I'm in that transition, you just doubled my problem, right? Because now I need to manage my on-prem legacy landscape and that new cloud platforms that you guys want to get onto, right? So from my perspective, right, a lot of these kind of strategic decisions, right, that are very easy to make, right? Let's go to the cloud, right? Let's modernize. That all sounds great, but the reality is that your business runs on that 25, 30-year-old ecosystem that you got right now, right? And being able to juggle that, right? Because in the end, if you think about it, right, a lot of the digital transformation needs to be funded from somewhere, right? So how do you actually, yeah, try and get to where you don't double the cost while you're in that transformation? And a lot of that, yeah, really comes down to standardization of your underlying support systems and ecosystem. If you go to the next slide, then, right, then we can start looking at, okay, so what in the end was I looking for, right? And I came up with this top 5 of, okay, so if you check all these boxes, you've got my interest, right? Because there's a lot of DevOps tools out there. It's a very hot topic. Everybody's wanting to do it, right? But for me, in a big enterprise environment, there's a couple of unique challenges, right? And for me, obviously, it's got to be future-proof, right? I got to be able to use this for the next 10+ years, right? And it's got to support all these strategic objectives, right? If we want to go to the cloud, I want to build something that actually, once we're getting to the cloud and actually in the cloud, still works. But then, just like the big pie chart that you showed, Dan, yeah, I can't forget about that legacy part, right? So legacy proof, it's gotta support the stuff that actually runs my business, right? Because else you're just adding to the complexity, right? I mean, if you're just another set of tools on top of all these other tools that I already had, I mean, you might have the better tool, but you're still just another tool, right? And then easy to adopt, right? Because my crew's job is not to implement DevOps systems, right? It's to deliver value to the business, right? And that really has got to always be the focus. And that's also why it's hard to justify these kind of projects to your leadership team, right? Because there's no direct value, visible value to the business, right? I mean, I'm basically saying, well, I need this so I can make my developers more effective. Yeah, okay, but don't you have tools already? And those kind of discussions are very hard to have, right? So something that is very easy to adopt is very important to me. And then easy to use, right? Because as you start playing in this enterprise grade scale playground, right now, the reality is that, I mean, Avery Dennison doesn't necessarily always attract the A+ talent, right? So my talent pool is not necessarily the same than if you were working for Google, right? Right. So I have to make do with the cards I'm dealt, right? I have a team, they're very good, right? But at the same point in time, right, they're typically, a big chunk of my resource pool is very inexperienced, right? I mean, we outsourced a lot of our IT services, right? And the reality is that, well, we were looking to cut costs there, and you get what you pay for. So I have to be realistic with, yeah, what my team is able to do. Right, so easy to use is very important to me. And then placed well with others, right? We've invested tons and tons of many millions of dollars over the years, decades on what we have now. And yeah, that's not just gonna go away, right? I mean, so what we're really looking for is a tool set that integrates with whatever we've already done as much as possible. So let's go to the next slide and actually show what that looks like now, right? I mean, and there's obviously more bits and pieces there because it's constantly evolving. But for us, really, right, we started to look at, okay, what are we going to standardize on when it comes to the top here, right, where we basically say, okay, the main interaction points, the main touch points with our user community, right? All right, ServiceNow as a help desk started using ServiceNow. Our HR team started using ServiceNow to work with our employees. All right, so we basically said, oh, let's latch on to that, right, and basically find something that actually allows us to do that communication back to our user base with ServiceNow, through ServiceNow, right? So from our user community perspective, they don't need to know what all tool sets that we have going on in the background, right? They're totally not interested in having to have accounts on all these different systems to hit an approve button every now and then, right? So we really want to have that integration going, right, to make it as transparent as possible. And at the same point in time, for our developer community, the techies in my team, right, I want to standardize on as few as possible tools, right? Because in the end, right, as my role started expanding, right, I started inheriting all these different technologies stacks, and they all came with their own tool chains, right? And up to the point where within the same tech stack, right, we had different teams doing .NET development, but even within that tech space, they would all have their own tools, right? Some would be using GitHub, some would have done their own scripting and all sorts of shell scripts, right? And that's great, right? Because it basically means that some automation has been done, but at the same point in time, it's all so incredibly siloed that from a how do you now manage the overall, it's very complicated, right? So what we were looking for is something like Flex Deploy that checks all those boxes and basically allows me to start standardizing at that level without losing all that work that went in to do these low-level automation efforts. And on top of that, right, the big thing there is because people then obviously keep asking me the same old, so you can do this with Jenkins. Well, yes, you can. Unfortunately, like I just mentioned, I don't think my team can, right? I don't have enough of them that I can dedicate to doing that level of automation in Jenkins. And B, look, the reality again is that I don't have a lot of senior people on my team that could do this kind of work. So it would inevitably end up with some junior folks, and it would take forever. I'm not saying they wouldn't be able to do it. It's just, it will never get done within the timelines we're looking for. And that's where it was very important for us that there's a lot of stuff that we can just sort of switch on, right? And that's where, if you look at the bottom, we basically looked at, okay, what is the bulk of the changes that we're managing? What technologies are basically the source of all the work, right? And that's where we had our on-prem e-business suite, our Salesforce. We still have a PeopleSoft environment. And we got all the Fusion, the .NET, and the Oracle OBIEE, right? And on top of that, we haven't really put it in yet because we haven't really started that part full on, is that now you're going to get onto all the different cloud versions of the Oracle stuff, right? And that's definitely something that from a future proofing, we definitely want something that does all this, right? Where we can just switch that on. But at the same point in time, once we actually get on that cloud journey, right, also allows us to switch the cloud version of Oracle's applications on just as easily. And then the big thing that we really started doing is also starting to standardize on GitHub. Right? Everybody was doing their own source control, and in the end, nobody knew where the source of truth was. Right? So as we start rolling this out, we also start standardizing on GitHub. And then another thing that we really started to benefit from very quickly is we had a test automation team, but they were living in their own little silo. And basically, we would have to request an automated test run 2 weeks in advance so they could prep the data, whatnot. And in my book, basically, well done, you're not doing test automation, right? In that period of time, I could have done all my testing manually. All right, so we basically spent a lot of time getting our test automation basically plugged into the deployment workflows. That's been great because in the end, there's no way around doing your testing now, which initially the developers were a little bit concerned about, right? But if it fails to test, it's not going to be deployed on time, and then you have to remind them, yeah, that's a good thing, because it would have probably broken something in production. So let's go to the next slide, Dan, because in the end, this is what we basically been looking to get out of it, right? And that's really what we are seeing now is, right, that the ramp up has been very quick, a lot quicker than people were expecting based on what we've done in the past with similar tools, right? And for us, this whole being able to pull it all together has been massively beneficial, right? And then, yeah, one of the things we put here is eliminate costs, right? Replace previous investments. To us, what there was, obviously, we had to make the business case to our leadership team, right? And when we started looking at all the different tools that we were using across all these different teams, doing all these different efforts to have their own little thing going, it adds up very quickly, right? All these tools individually might not necessarily be a shocking investment, but if you start adding it up, it's quite a lot of money, right? So we basically build a business case around that. But even on top of that, right, if we're looking back, right, I think a lot of the cost elimination is also cost avoidance is there, right? If you look at going to the cloud, right, if you think about having to basically double your complexity by basically maintaining two of these versions of these same platforms in parallel, my change management team can do both now, right? I mean, I don't need to ramp up a separate team around all the cloud stuff we're doing. So a lot of benefits, and yeah, they materialize very quickly. I think that's been very important to us, is that, yeah, once people actually saw what it is we were trying to do, I mean, I keep getting more and more people knocking on my doors, hey, when can we get our stuff onto Flex Deploy? And up to the point where the list is growing, right? Where everybody is seeing that, okay, I want some of that. And look, in the end, that's what we were shooting for. So that's been a great experience.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that. That's very insightful, and you know, it's interesting how you map onto the first case where you're heavily invested in leveraging e-business suite and the surrounding technologies, other applications, things in your data center, and well positioned given your rapid implementation and such, and looking forward to that evolution to the cloud, which I know you're working on as we speak. So thanks for that. Well, let's shift gears, Max. How about a quick introduction, and if you could take us through a bit of your journey, please.
Sounds great. Thanks, Dan. Thanks, Oob. Yeah, as Dan alluded to, I'm Max Williams. I'm a manager in our applications management team. I currently manage 4 teams in our integration and process automation space at HNI. As my blurb kind of alludes to, I've been trying to automate myself out of my job for the last 13 years, and DevOps has been, that hot button item that I've been able to latch onto. And I probably couldn't have done any of that without Flexagon and the Flex Deploy tool at the speed that I have been able to. If you want to pop over to the next slide, Dan, I'll kind of dive into HNI and how we got to where we determined we kind of needed Flexagon. Our technology space was Oracle 11G. We were on-prem, and we were writing deployment scripts every day. Sometimes, multiple times a day, deploying multiple times a day, starting fires with those deployments and running around trying to figure out how to fix it. And so we started, kind of tracking some of the things that may say, okay, how do we get better? Those manual processes being error prone, heavily time consuming, not only to create, but to validate after the fact. Were not helping us move at the speed that we needed to. Our lack of control with some of our scripts and how we were having to apply changes when we were doing it was raising more red flags. And then ultimately we had directive to start moving to some of these cloud-based things. So not only were we making the decision to move data centers from on-prem to cloud hosted, also starting to get into Fusion apps and cloud-first technologies. All of these things said, hey, the way you're doing it isn't great, and you need to do better. So if you want to pop over to the next slide, Dan, kind of building off of Ube's journey, we had really 4 key criteria that said, go find something, and this is what you're going to use to evaluate what you ultimately get to. Our first one being our integrated solution. So our entire SDLC had numerous systems involved in that. And as Dan alluded to in kind of some of his initial slides, all these tools are great. And now how do we put them together and use them to make us the most efficient and profitable that we can be? We needed to be able to support multiple technologies across vendors, across age, across different capabilities, and be able to support that in one tool was a big driver for us. We need to be able to move faster. The manual work we were doing, the manual gates that we were having to overcome or get past was very slow. And so we needed a tool that could help us get there faster, but not sacrifice our quality during that time. And then ultimately, because we were doing this big move and we have so many of these disjointed, maybe not necessarily easily connected systems, big projects, big environments that maybe introduce some of our complexity when releasing. So multiple teams, multiple persons, multiple hours. We needed a way to kind of play puppet master for that. And so ultimately those 4 criteria were what brought us here. So building off of the Flexagon diagram, this is HNI's landscape today. We are taking our demand management all the way through the process to the monitoring aspect here and using Flex Deploy along the way. And what really kind of tipped Flexagon and their Flex Deploy product over the edge, like this is the one we're going to use. All of these things that are listed here primarily came out of the box. Save for Informatica on that on this slide, all of this was available to me on day 1 when I started my journey. And the ability to have a consistent way to bring applications on was fantastic. We didn't start with all of these up front. we knew that we needed to get some quick wins. And so our Oracle ERP platform was really where we focused in our journey, and the integration tools from Oracle with that. And then we started adding on to where we are today, building out our test platform, managing some more on the Fusion apps. It's been a very positive journey. Do you want to go to the next slide, Dan? So what did Flex Deploy give us? You know, we talked about these things that said, all right, this is why we should go with Flex Deploy. This is some things that we can get from it. You know, one of the points I hit on earlier was the seamless delivery. We had so much pain in our delivery process. By implementing Flex Deploy, we were able to step back and see almost a 100% reduction in our errors. Some of that was person error, system error, lack of integration error. Being able to use Flex Deploy gave us this ability to deliver. Our audit review hours, I estimated per each release, we had a minimum of a 1 hour audit every single time of, hey, we said we were going to do X, Y, Z. Did we actually do that? Or did we introduce something new that was not intended? And we were, you know, you could exponentially grow that review time based on the size of our deployments. You know, considering somewhere in the ballpark of 270 extensions in our ERP suite, moving from one data center to another, validating that we did that right, it was a whole day affair. Just checking our work, hoping that our homegrown tools and scripts all work together well, compared to Flex Deploy giving me a report the second that the release finished to say, hey, here you go. This is what happened, and could easily cross-check that. And then we really grew in our automation space. Being able to point and click and say go was a big gain in our life cycle, but we were also maybe an unintended victory. We're able to help in our day-to-day management in our non-prod environments. Using the releases and pipelines that are available in Flex Deploy, we were able to use functions that members in our application DBA team were performing every night. And so getting some of those quick wins in those non-prod environments was also beneficial. And then, you know, we got continuous repeatable things between our environments, so we knew what to expect. It was a big win for us, and we're still seeing these successes today.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thanks for that, Max. That's very helpful. It's interesting to just listen to how, you know, both at HNI and then how that compares and contrasts with what Ub was talking about with Avery, where you're both heavily using Flex Deploy for e-business suite. You know, one on-prem, but you know, one lift and shift to run on Oracle Cloud Infrastructure, and then there's some similarity with technologies that work both on-prem and in the cloud, and with the real key differentiator outside of the Salesforce piece that you know, Avery's using it for, it's really that rate and pace that we were talking about, the adoption of, in your case, rapid adoption of some of the cloud, you know, applications, cloud BI, cloud you know, integration, and some of those things where you're doing that a little more rapidly, and we're able to tackle that, you know, not all right out the gate, but a fast follower, so to speak. All right, well, thanks a lot to both Max and Ub for sharing that overview of what they've been up to. We're going to do a little bit of rapid fire here and ask a handful of questions that you know, we thought about ahead of time, whereby we'll just get a perspective from both of them on these questions. We're putting them on the screen in case you want to think about them or see them while we're talking through them. And so, clearly the one focus here in this session is Oracle, and how do we take existing technology that's running large enterprises, and how do we get on a path to the cloud? And that's all very importantly. The reality is it's not only Oracle, it is multi-cloud, right? All larger enterprises are in multi-cloud type of footprints. That's very important. And so, maybe we'll start with Ub. What do you see when it comes to DevOps related challenges? What do you see related to multi-cloud architectures, and how you've thought about addressing them, how you've addressed some of them?
Yeah, so from my perspective, it's always been an interesting conundrum, right? Because like I said earlier, right, it's easy to bring in the consultants at that C-level discussion and say to the cloud, right? But the problem there is that then we can't we can't make up our minds on which cloud, right? So you end up with multiple, right? And at that point in time, you're gonna run into the same problem that we had on-prem, right? Nothing is talking to nothing, right? So you have to do a lot of integrations, and every time you do integrations, you now have dependencies, right? So the moment I have one system talking to another system, now I need to manage changes in two systems and one integration, right? And it never stops there, right? I mean, if you were to draw a map of all the different systems talking to each other within an organization like Avery Dennison, it's literally that dependency can go like 7, 8 layers deep. And you lose visibility very quickly, right? So for me, DevOps within just an individual tech stack, application related space doesn't solve the problem, right? Because in the end, I need to be able to do that orchestration. And then, like I said, people keep reminding me that, but once we're on the cloud, well, yeah, if you would have selected one cloud, that would have been the future state, right? But you didn't, right? And at the same point in time, organization like Avery Dennison, we grow by acquisition, so we're never done, right? You'll never get to that ultimate state of where everything is on one platform, right? Every time we buy a new company, we inherit whatever ecosystem they have running their business, and it all starts over again, right? So DevOps, from my perspective, there's a lot of value in doing as much automation as possible. The problem there is that the DevOps itself now becomes a challenge, right? How do you make that efficient? And I think that's where, for us, Flex Deploy really was, sort of a solution to that problem, right? I mean, because in the end, if my DevOps team becomes bigger than my dev team, then I'm doing something wrong.
That's a different challenge, right? Exactly. Okay, no, thanks for that, Max. What are your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I think I got to build on Ub. He hit exactly kind of where we are feeling pain today and have used Flex Deploy to mitigate that. Multiple cloud implementations mean multiple strategies to integrate with those platforms. And if without a tool like Flex Deploy, you're building your integrations between these systems. You're automating them in whichever way you see. And what sounds like and Avery Dennison has felt is your DevOps team starts to grow, right? And that's not the goal. And so having a platform, and specifically the out-of-the-box capabilities to point and click and say, hey, look, now we're deploying to Azure instead of Oracle Cloud infrastructure, was a quick win and helps put the focus for the dev team on the dev team, and the ops team managing the operations as they need to. And our life cycle can continue with one consistent, repeatable process on one platform.
Wonderful. Yeah, similar challenges, but also similar strategies in terms of how you've approached it. So thanks for that, guys. Maybe moving on, test automation. We talked a little bit about it. I think both of you had some examples of what you've done in the test space, and clearly in terms of maturing a DevOps process, practice, strategy. and maturing CI/CD in general. It's important. So maybe if you guys could talk about your approach, how have you approached test automation, and have you integrated that into your release pipelines? Max, you want to go first here?
I'd be happy to. Yeah, for our software development staff, 10 years ago, if you said test automation, they would know what testing is, and they would know what automation is, but not together. And so for us, one of the big things as we started pushing the CI/CD approach and trying to sell it to the different software teams, it was, how can we make your life easier? And what can we do to solve some of these pain points that we're seeing when ultimately getting to our production environment? And so for us, we really dove in technology specific to take an area that we could easily build off of, display how that's working for us and the wins we've been able to gain through adding some test automation practices, and then be able to use that as leverage to say, okay, how do we start integrating this with other platforms? So for our release pipelines, when we first went to Flex Deploy, our pipeline had an external gate that said, is testing done? And somebody would get an email when that stage hit, and they'd say, yep, I think it's done. And they'd press go, and you've now signed off on your testing. And we said, whoa, okay, I think, with this tool, I think we can dive in real quick and show you how, all right, we have these scenarios that we run every time. We can create the data that we need to for these scenarios and execute it. And so we started with our middleware tier and built out our web service tests. And first had those tests just being executed, and then externally signed off, hey, okay, yes, we're agreeing that these tests passed. And then, as we started to show that it was repeatable and consistent, and the outputs, gave us that go, no go environment, we were able to then flip that so that Flex Deploy itself was saying, okay, you deployed a SOA project. Here's the test for that SOA project, run it. Oh, that test failed. There was something missing. The release stopped. So it was great to realize that after a couple of years of manual touching, and has been a good point that we can continue to bring to our other software development teams to enhance how we're deploying their code through Flex Deploy.
Yeah, and that sounds good. And interestingly enough, that is a rather common area to start with, as you said, build off something. Integration is a perfect example, and I think you're using Postman. It might be SOAP UI. There's a lot of other things that test APIs, but starting in that integration land and building from that, we see that across many customers. So thanks for that. Ub, how about you guys?
Yeah, I mean, test automation has always been one of these things where whenever you have these things that fall through the cracks, right? Why are we not doing more testing? Why did this go through? Why are we not automating the testing? And there's a lot of reasons why it's not being done. But in the end, the problem has always been that it's been mostly optional outside of the actual workflow, right? And in the end, so it's just like Max says, right? You as a manager are responsible for whatever it is that needs to be tested. Your responsibility really is just to say yes, right? I mean, that's really literally all I got to go with, right? And yeah, the moment the folks on the business side say, yeah, it looks good, I mean, at that point in time, I just have to rely on that they actually did the testing, right? And We looked at that in the past, right, where we have a test automation team using what at the time was the HP test suite, right? And look, it's a great tool in itself, but again, it's a standalone tool, right? It's not integrated, and yeah, it's easily bypassed. And on top of that, right, we're running into the same problem again, right? It's test automation is only as good as the test scripts you have, right? So you need to make sure that that's a living and breathing part of your release cycle. And on top, yeah, that basically also means that from a purely life cycle management on the testing tools, a lot of things changed in the last 15 years since we started using the HP tool set, right? So now we're looking at replacing that HP tool set with Selenium, right? Introducing something like SonarQube to have some just sort of quick and easy code review in place, right? And all these things traditionally would mean more work for my development team, right? And look, in the end, if that means that we don't find out about issues in production, that's a good thing. But motivating developers to do testing, I think that's an uphill battle. Right, so that's really where test automation comes in for me, but at the same point in time can be optional, right? So by incorporating that into the workflow, having that stage gate being enforced by Flex deploy, right? I mean, if it doesn't pass the test, then it ain't going nowhere till you address it. All that's been great, right? And at this point in time, also the whole test automation team is getting a lot more recognition for what they're doing, because look, they were just doing their own thing. Nobody knew what they were doing, right? Getting a test ran, like I said before, you literally have to submit a form 2 weeks in advance for them to be able to run their automated tests. So now it's all integrated. It just runs.
Yeah, and I remember you mentioning some of that. It's like on one hand, you needed to get that integrated in, and I think even up front, well, prior to your implementation, you're talking about already at that point that the importance of integrating it into your release pipelines. But very importantly, I think your future-proof thing. When we were talking way up front, you knew that you had some other areas you wanted to invest in, and whether it was Selenium or Sonar, that sort of thing, and being able to snap those in as you continue to mature. And the observation you mentioned about the visibility, the positive visibility to the testing, where because it's now snapped into the release life cycle and it's tracked and visible, and you can look at the trends and it's part of your end-to-end flow. Yeah, I think that is a really neat outcome, where the visibility says, wow, we're able to move faster and higher quality because these people, they're doing things in the background, but they're but they're visible in the sense that it's integrated into the end-to-end process. And so take credit for that sort of thing. So that's awesome. Okay, 2 other areas where we can touch on: security, forms of governance, very important. Can you just mention a couple things, maybe Oob, that you've incorporated, into your process as it relates to these 2 topics?
Yeah, I mean, the governance is the obvious one here, right? Because in the end, by having no clear process, different processes scattered around different development teams doing their own thing, from a governance perspective, that's a nightmare, right? Because in the end, you don't really have the visibility on what these people are all doing on a daily basis, and at the same point in time, right, you have to explain it to an auditor when they come knocking, right? So there's a lot of work just explaining what you've done over the last 12 months. That's not even the biggest thing for me, right? Because the biggest thing for me has always been is that I got a lot of developers doing stuff that really they're not hired to do, right? And if I can get to the point where these audits become a lot easier, but also if you think about it, right, a lot of the audit failures, whatever you want to call them, were typically around segregation of duties, right? Where if you have these people supporting an application with a very small team, segregation of duties becomes very difficult, right? Because if they're the only one that know how to deploy something, well, I guess you're gonna need to have access to production, right? Mm-hmm. And by being able to pipe all that through Flex Deploy, right? I don't have that problem anymore because I basically can prove to the auditors very quickly that, look, developers can only create the release, and then it's basically magic from there.
Yeah. Well, which also, to your point, is very important in terms of job satisfaction, right? The developers, they want to develop. You want them to be productive and loving what they do. And if you can just have a process that makes sure that those security related things like segregation of duties work, or the audits that come out the back end, that they're there at your convenience, right? They're just right there. And not spending time in those areas that developers or other admins or release managers, it's not interesting to them, and it certainly isn't providing additional value to the business at the end of the day. So everybody wins when you can incorporate that into your process.
Yeah, dealing with auditors is very low on their list of most favorite things.
Yeah, exactly. How about you, Max? How about over at HNI?
Yeah, it sounds like you set Oob and I up just to bounce off of each other, because I have to second about everything he said there. The segregation of duties violations that we were trying to fix and avoid was a big thing for us pre-Flex Deploy. And the ability to let teams do what they're good at and remove any roadblocks that could possibly be removed to let them do their job and get things moving through the entire life cycle was big for us. We've implemented Jira, for our demand management, as well as ServiceNow for our incident and service and change processes, and have been able to integrate those tools into our not only our DevOps process, but our DevOps tool as well. And being able to take some of those points where we've put a physical interaction and take those away and make it more systemic, based on, hey, if I'm committing a change with a issue number and I've got that integration set up in Flex Deploy in my pipeline, each of these things can help trigger the next step to help move our process, and we can show our auditors without having to spend hours in front of a screen while we're doing a process that, look, this is where the developer stopped touching this, and this is where the system took over, and here's our full circle checks and balances in our entire flow. And ultimately that governance has helped us realize some benefits just in our output. So it's still a high priority. Oob touched on those auditors, they want to know, and developers do not want to interact with them. And so where we've been able to see these victories has been great.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And not surprisingly, there's some similarities in what you were focused on and what you've been able to achieve. Maybe they come in different shapes and sizes in terms of the tools and what have you, but when you've got happy developers on one hand and happy auditors on the other hand, well, then everybody's good. All right, well, this one's a quick hitter, right? This is just keep it real short. So what would you change? I mean, if there's something you would change as part of your overall implementation, what is it? Max, go first, please.
Remove external interactions. So specific to us, there's still pieces in our implementation that could be automated, and we don't have the full. For those who are familiar with the whole kind of DevOps, visually, they show it as an infinity symbol, right? And some of those, to be truly infinite, we need more automation.
Got it. We could go into that one for a long time, but it sounds like you've done a lot. You've done a lot to move along that path, but some additional investment required to be able to get truly, continuous. But that's why you're on a journey. Oob, how about you?
Yeah, for me, probably a little bit more cryptic, right? Because I always say, take back accountability into IT for the work we do, right? Because if you think about what we've traditionally done in IT, we've basically been deflecting, right? Where we basically say, well, you guys signed off, right? And then it's not my fault if something breaks. Well, I think that's too easy, right? I think that IT has a responsibility to really make a much more concerted effort to make sure stuff works when it gets deployed, right? We can't rely on somebody on the business who looks at the change every once in a while to be accountable for the final yes or no answer, right? We got to get to that point where, as an IT organization, let's be fully accountable for the stuff we do, right? And do we want their check box ticked? Yes, but I should be 99+% sure that whatever I deliver actually meets their requirements and my quality requirements.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Because you're there to serve, there's an end, right? End to it. And it probably goes back to some of the stuff we talked about up front, which is the business value, right? And so make sure that we can deliver quickly with high quality and taking accountability for that within the IT team certainly seems to make a lot of sense. Okay, we've got a few minutes left. Last question, talking about the benefits, right? So you set down a path focused on maybe typical speed, quality, cost, risk improvements. All right, if you had one of those that you picked when you started, this is what we meant to achieve more than any other, what was it? And then you'll fast forward to where you're at now, has that been the most impactful in terms of driving an improvement or impact, or what have you found to be the top improvement? Oob?
Speed, because that to me has always been the one that the business is pushing for, because they basically assume that it's my problem to make sure that the quality and the cost are under control, right? So from my perspective, and that's also why I said bring back accountability in the IT organization for quality and cost, because in the end, business just cares about speed.
And so speed was what you set out for, and I think you're implying that you were able to achieve that. Is that, did you hit the mark there?
Yes, if you think about where we were before we went down this journey, right? People were talking about actually changing to quarterly releases because there's just too many things going wrong. Now we're doing weekly releases and people are starting to question why we even need to wait for the weekend, right? I mean, to me, that's the ultimate proof that we can do this at a rate than quarterly. Come on, guys.
Yeah, and I think that really ties back to the prior discussion. At the end of the day, it's that continuous nature and knowing that, hey, you're going to be able to continuously deliver and it's going to work when you get there, right? So, and who doesn't want to see, certainly the business, not to mention the development teams and what have you that are working on it, to be able to get that stuff, into the hands of the end user. So, Max, what are your thoughts on this one?
I would say we probably started out equally looking at quality and cost as our two big things, all at the same rate. We knew we needed to do things better and more consistently, but we also needed to cut back on our costs, and that really came down to the amount of time and rework that was done. So that's why we had those two together. And maybe a month after we started, I would have said, yep, those were still what we had achieved. But ultimately, the top improvement has been speed and our ability to deliver the expected results so much faster than we ever had been able to before has been huge for us.
Awesome. Well, if you can do that, if you can improve the speed, which both of you are describing, that was important and is important, and then manage cost and other elements of like risk along the way, well, clearly that's more of the nirvana. So, well, I'll tell you what. Thank you very much, Max, Oob. Really appreciate you spending time here with us today. This has been very insightful, walking through your journey and your paths to the cloud, what you've been able to achieve. and a little bit on where you're headed. So thanks for all of that, and thanks for to DZone, for working with us on this. We love DZone, a great partner here. Appreciate that. You'll see a few next steps here for contact information, scheduling a demo, all of this good stuff. But for all of you, thank you very much.
Thank you, Dan, and thanks to you and Hoob and Max as well for being with us. And for everyone watching, I encourage you to check out our website, dzone.com/webinars. We've got a ton of other great events up there, just like this one. We've got past webinars, we've got on-demand webinars, and all kinds of upcoming events for you to check out. So visit dzone.com/webinars, and you can see everything we've got there. We cover a wide range of topics that are relevant and important for developers. So there's plenty there for you to go see and learn from. So thank you all very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.